Are you enjoying this podcast? Well, you have KUOW members to thank for that. KUOW members make the trusted local journalism and storytelling you hear on this show possible. Become a member today and help support the production of this podcast. It only takes a minute. Make a donation at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thanks.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. So far today, we've talked about how party officials from both sides of the aisle are considering the president's decision to step down from this race. And we've heard how polling changed the conversation about among President Biden's advisors. But those aren't the only people who will ultimately be deciding the outcome of this race in November. I mean, really, it comes down to the voters, right? Will an influx of Democratic Party fundraising, institutional support, as well as a new narrative be enough to engage the average American voter? Or does the seeming momentum of the Republican Party sweep former President Trump back into office? Here to discuss is Eric Liu. Liu is the CEO and co-founder of Citizen University, a cross-partisan nonprofit dedicated to reviving civic engagement. He's also a former foreign policy speechwriter and deputy domestic policy advisor in the Clinton administration. Eric, thank you so much for being here. Hello.
Glad to be with you, Libby.
So what was your initial reaction to hearing the news yesterday that President Biden was saying, I'm out, I'm leaving the stage?
I have to tell you, because we've all dived immediately into the political prognostication and the polling and the tactics and the kind of intrigue. My first reaction was simply a human reaction that I felt for the man. I felt that he did the right thing. But I also felt that this was the whole unfolding of the end of this campaign for him from the time his debate happened was just on a certain level tragic. And I think that feeling of loss of control, loss of the ability to kind of end on his terms, watching him literally just bleed away support and as if all that he'd done didn't matter. Just again, whether you agreed or not with the idea that he was being unfairly pushed out, it was just sad. And he did the right thing. And I think the kind of immediate flip of the narrative among Democrats of, my God, he's a patriot, he's a hero, he's the most consequential president since, FDR. I suspect, I don't know him, but I suspect that a lot of that is bouncing off him right now because he knows that is partially, as calculated as the leaks were and the push to get him out in the first place.
Yeah, you had the Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi kind of trifecta coordinated set of leaks last week that really felt like the dam breaking, to me at least. And as you say, there is a way in which we're talking about Joe Biden as a hero to be able to, from the Democrats' perspective, step out of, this big job, which so few people actually do. But how much was his decision and how much was actually, the Democratic Party deciding it was time and it became untenable for him?
I mean, look, any of us who have elder parents, any of your listeners who might be in Joe Biden's age range, know the sad kind of anguish and pain of, the decline of one's faculties, the losing of a grip of command of oneself and one's family and one's situation. But to have that happen in real time, in slow motion, in this kind of unfolding betrayal, just compounded in a way that was, again, just on a human level, was sad. And I do think his decision literally at the last minute. I mean, he didn't let his own staff know outside of a tiny circle till 1 minute before he went public, was kind of a brilliant last minute way to regain not only control of the narrative, but a sense of dignity in this, that I am going to end this, but I'm going to do it on my terms. I'm not going to get leaked to death and I'm going to own it. And I'm going to pass the baton and help the person who's been my vice president. I happen to think this was the right thing to do for both his party and I think for the country, but it has to hurt still for him.
Do you think that saps energy from Democratic voters or people who could be persuaded to be Democratic voters? Or does this shift to all in on Vice President Harris? This is the next generation. She's an exciting new face. Do enough to engage voters on the left to make this a real contest?
Well, I mean, I think time truly will tell. If there's one thing this election year has taught us is that and you know this being in the media, Libby, we are in a different kind of metabolism and a half-life of memory than even 2022 or 2020. The fact that you had an assassination attempt on a major party nominee and it just kind of got priced into the stock, like, yep, that's what happens in politics. Yep, that's the kind of crazy that Trump draws, around him. Like, and then we just moved on and people didn't want to talk about it. Says that it's very hard, I think, to predict even this time next week, where things will be. I think this tidal wave of support for the vice president is partly about just the pent up relief that so many Democratic voters had that they were about to go down with the ship, and that Captain Biden wasn't going to let go of the wheel, even though we're headed into this iceberg, whatever your metaphor is, and just this kind of huge pent up relief has kind of led to this surge of support. But I would wait a few days and see. I mean, the fact is that Kamala Harris, when she ran for president in 2020, wasn't the strongest candidate. Isn't in some ways the most gifted politician among the Democrats. But I think what you can't tell is how much this incredible surge, even this week, is going to fortify her, boost her confidence, and raise her game in a way that really helps her make the case. And to me, the thing that she's got to do is number one, something that President Biden, unfortunately for him, and his campaign wasn't really effectively able to do much of this year, which is to make a forceful case for what this administration has done. They have an affirmative case to make, and they've got surrogates out there making it, but there's no substitute for the actual candidate or nominee. And so if she just brings it that way, and she's gotten a lot of good practice on that on the trail as VP, I think she's going to be doing pretty well for herself. But the other thing she's going to have to do in fairly short order is just define herself before she gets defined by the Trump team in this kind of predictable way as a left-wing radical and the open borders czar who's led in all these migrants. She's got to define herself reasonably quickly, because while Democrats are elated right now, most of the independent and swing voters and undecideds or movables out there, they're not caught up in that enthusiastic frenzy. They're just waiting and watching to see, who is this? How's she going to be? Is she going to be able to stand on her own and make a case? And if she is, then I think this game has fundamentally changed, because now the Democrats can say, we have a choice now. This is not a no-choice election between two octogenarians or near octogenarians. This is now a choice, and we've got someone who's forceful, capable, and competent. And if Democrats can do that, then she will have changed the game. But again, it just remains to be seen how she plays at this level now.
Yeah. We only have about 2 minutes left, Eric. Just in the final couple of minutes, obviously the presidential races are consequential, but even more so local races. I've been talking with the state Democratic Party chair and state Republican Party chair about initiatives, candidates at local races, and how all of this is going to play into what happens in people's own backyards. How do you, in your work with civic engagement, encourage people to look beyond the national politics, which really dominate news cycles, and think about, being engaged in these local issues?
Yeah, if I take off my hat as, Democrat and former Clinton White House, aide, and put on my hat as Citizen University CEO, one of my core messages in this work is that democracy is bigger than elections. You're saying elections aren't just presidential, they're also local. But I'm saying something even beyond that. Democracy isn't just elections, that we've got to rebuild the capacity to learn how to govern ourselves, to understand how power is circulating in our community, to understand how we solve problems together in a local way that's relational, face-to-face, and take responsibility for what's broken and what can be fixed in Seattle, in King County, across Washington State and the Northwest. Presidents can make some of those things harder, but they can't magically fix anything for us, whether your candidate wins or not. how we live most of our lives in community, in neighborhood, and where we raise our families has to do with whether we rebuild the muscle that is not a spectator muscle, but is a participant muscle. And that's so much what we've got to do right now.
Eric Liu is the CEO and co-founder of Citizen University, a cross-partisan nonprofit dedicated to reviving civic engagement. He had two different hats on in this interview, and he switched them very capably. Eric, thank you so much for being here.
Libby, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.